Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say. Um, I like to look at everyone's backgrounds, by the way. Marcelo, you have a cool background. So
Thank you.
um, I like it. Now that we're a couple of years into doing this, everyone's kind of got their thing going. Let me share my screen, or I'll share the presentation window. And I'm happy to reference this on Discord as well. Let's see. Cool. So hopefully everybody can see that. Yeah, good. Awesome.
Yes.
Hey, well, thank you again. I'm happy to be here representing the TinyML Foundation. I actually started as executive director about 3 weeks ago. So this is a great what they call a forcing function. At Microsoft, we call this a forcing function, where you need to kind of get it together. And so when I was asked to sort of give this presentation, I'm like, well, this is a good forcing function for me to sort of tell the story as I see it, especially on the connection between what we're doing in academia, which I think is one of the most important parts of the TinyML Foundation. It's kind of the one of the secret sauce of this community is kind of the academic community and the input. So let me kind of talk through it, and then we'll have some calls to action at the end. Let me get started with who I am. So as I mentioned, I just started. Although at some point I won't be able to use that excuse. Um, but I was, as Marcelo mentioned, I've been in the industry for a long time. I actually knew Evgeny Gusev many years ago, working with them at Qualcomm. But I spent about 18 years at Microsoft. I actually live about a block from the Microsoft campus. That's where I am right now. Um, I was in the Azure Edge and Azure hardware group, an engineering group working on Edge AI, and with a lot of semiconductor and device builder partners and things. Did that for a while. Before that, I worked actually in the phone group, and also drove the Windows on Snapdragon program for Microsoft. But I came in as a phone person from Silicon Valley, where I spent about 14 years doing small company stuff, embedded Java. I actually started as a BIOS engineer, if you're familiar with Phoenix BIOS on the PC. So I spent 9 years as a BIOS engineer, which is probably it's a long time to do BIOS, but it was fun. And graduated Boston University, have a degree in computer engineering from BU. Still stay in close contact with BU and help them with their mentoring programs for the College of Engineering. And my daughter is actually at Boston University as well, so have a lot of ties there to BU. So that's me. But let's move on to the more important things. Let's give you some context. Um, so I think one of the things, and I'm probably what they say preaching to the choir is when I talk to people about when I took this job, people said, well, ML and AI that's been around for a long time. It's like, yeah, well, actually the term artificial intelligence has been around since like 1956. But what's different now is that, as you know, the advances in semiconductors, the advances in connectivity, the more sophisticated software, it's all sort of combining together to create all this new functionality. And it has been for a number of years, probably the last kind of 5 to 10 years, maybe 5 years. Um, and so AI, which has been, traditionally more theoretical in the past kind of 5 to 10 years, has really become pretty practical. And we're now seeing big transformations in virtually every industry, even before this latest wave, as you know. When I was at Microsoft, we spent a lot of time on AI vision and anomaly detection and working with a lot of these kind of big agriculture companies, big retail companies, and they're all trying to transform their businesses in one form or another, right? I did a project with a lot of quick serve restaurants, so they call it QSRs. So these are the McDonald's and the KFC, Taco Bell, and all of them are using a lot of Edge AI to manage basically their efficiencies, kind of cost of labor. Be amazed at how much technology is in a drive-through restaurant these days, especially around AI. So it's transforming everything. It's transforming the digital landscape, and as we know on the edge side, there's a ton of opportunity as these models get more and more efficient and get smaller with more efficient semiconductors. So huge opportunity, a lot of transformation going on. You know the story. Um, the other thing that's happening too is, the change. Kind of the rate of change is kind of ridiculous. It's so hard to keep up with the rate of change going on that whatever was happening last year is kind of really old news. I was looking through some of the stuff TinyML was talking about last year, and I was like, oh, this like really, there's lots of new stuff to talk about. And so, even I was on the board of the LoRa Alliance for a while, and I was kind of a big fan of, I still am a big fan of low power wireless connectivity, whether that's LoRa or WiODi or WiSun or whatever, name it. And 5G RedCap. There's so many things going on that it's really challenging to sort of figure out, especially if you're on the industry and business side, like what's next? What do I need to be focusing on to use this as an advantage? What's real? What's actually happening that I could actually deploy? As you know, I mean, when you get into the industry side, it's all about, what can I buy? What can I sell? What can I deploy? And how can I help my business? And so a lot of folks in that side of the world are really trying to figure out, what's available when, and how do I make that a competitive advantage? The other thing that's happening too, I'll touch upon it a little bit, is around the notion of generative AI and transformer models making their way into the edge. If I was at the NVIDIA GTC about a month or so ago, was that it? I don't know. It was a crazy show. If anyone has a chance to ever get to NVIDIA GTC in the Bay Area, I think there was 20,000 something people there. It was like shoulder to shoulder packed. Incredible things going on, of course, in the cloud with Blackwells and stuff. But really, I thought the action was like on the Jetson Orin side and what was happening there, because lots of people were running, small language models or LLMs kind of squished down on edge equipment, and the ability to take like a TinyML type of sensor, collect some, little image or something, piece of data, and then have the LLM act on that and describe that and stuff. Those kind of combinations now we're seeing of generative AI and kind of sensor data combining together in systems is really fantastic. There's an interesting stat here, like the Meta's Llama model shrank about 10x in 9 months. And For those that saw, Pete Warden was demonstrating at a recent seminar we had, running an LLM on a Raspberry Pi. And so the ability on the inferencing side to run these models is really fantastic. And so I think people are just wrapping their heads around now what's possible. So the rate of change in this industry is amazing, and it's making it super challenging for people to figure out, what's next, what's real, what can I do. Uh, so then there's this TinyML, like we call it, climbing up the TinyML mountain, and I know a number of you have been involved in many years. Um, Although it wasn't that long ago when sort of things were still in the feasibility stage. So going back to sort of the 2018 or maybe slightly earlier, really trying to figure out, how small can we go and what can we actually get done. Um, and then building awareness and prototypes. As I mentioned, I started getting involved with Qualcomm and Evgeny's work probably around 2019-ish or so. We were trying to figure out, how can we connect Azure to very small sensors and do interesting things for our commercial customers. Um, and then we started to see, in the kind of early 20s, recently, a lot of scaled deployments, working with ST Micro and NXP and also some of the smaller folks, Alice Semiconductor, a lot of really cool deployments going on in the field where, there's real return on investment. And so the good news is there's real business there. It's creating, the business creates kind of a gravitational pull, right? For everyone to kind of do more research, develop more products, develop more models, and students get more and more interested in getting into the business. As I mentioned, I do a lot of mentoring at Boston University for, I call them early in career people, but typically undergraduates, maybe some graduates. And there's a lot of excitement there, as you know, to figure out how to get into this business and get internships and get connected. And I think that's actually one of the really interesting opportunities with the TinyML Foundation and academia, is to make more of those connections. Um, But anyway, so we're kind of around step two-ish or so, and now I think we're on the cusp, as we said, experimentation with SLMs and transformers and things. I think we'll start to see those go into deployments in the next year or two. And then finally, of course, around 2030, we're starting to guess here, but ultimately all this becomes is like a series of AI workloads running on different parts of the edge, right? So between the cloud and some maybe near-prem and some gateways and some on-prem and some sensors, there's going to be AI models running all over the place, and how they're managed and orchestrated and work together, how they're deployed, how they're updated, where's the training, where's the inferencing. All of that is going to be orchestration software and interesting systems that are going to do things with all this stuff. And that's another interesting part of the story too, that I hope the TinyML Foundation gets more involved with, the whole orchestration thing. I'm a big fan of CNCF and figuring out how to do cloud DevOps on edge devices, and gets really challenging as you get to smaller and smaller things, because you can't sort of spin up a Kubernetes container on an MCU. But there's other things you can do there. So I think that's really exciting. So I think that's kind of what we're getting to. And when I talk to industry folks about where this is heading, that's kind of where it is. It's kind of a continuous fabric of AI workloads that are running from edge to cloud, and so we kind of keep our eyes on the prize there. So TinyML Foundation, my take is it's kind of what's next in edge AI. And I think it's really the place to go, whether you're in academia or whether you're in industry, whether you're a VC looking to fund startups, press analysts, the place to be, the community to understand what's happening, and what's next in the world of AI, and especially in resource constrained AI. Sometimes we call it tiny AI, sometimes it's edge AI. I think Qualcomm calls it on-device AI. There's lots of terms out there. I think we all know what we're talking about. But the foundation's got, not surprisingly, a pretty big footprint worldwide. We are a nonprofit. And basically, we have a bunch of folks in these meetup groups. A lot of, I would say, the geographic diversity is fantastic. It's great to see this morning people from so many different countries. It's an amazing thing. When I was at Microsoft, I think we suffered a little bit from our kind of geographic bias. So, they always said if it wasn't, built in Redmond, Washington, then whatever. And then we sort of expanded our scope to the US and got a little more worldwide. But TinyML Foundation truly is a worldwide community, which is fantastic. We do a lot of events, a lot of online symposiums, we have TinyML talks every week, which is pretty cool. And I would encourage folks to contact us about those. And then we do these in-person community events. We just had our summit in the US like 2 weeks ago in California, in the Bay Area. That was a lot of fun. Hundreds of people, few days. There's nothing better than kind of the face-to-face connections that you can make with this community. I know it's difficult sometimes because of the geographic diversity, but we will have another one coming up in Milan at the end of June, and then Taipei after that, and we'll do a few of those a year. But the online events too are pretty cool. Got a lot of stuff up on YouTube, so if you're interested in seeing any of this stuff, the YouTube channel is kind of the place to be. A lot of people on LinkedIn as well. We are going to, I was actually talking to Dr. Reddy yesterday. I think we're going to bring some folks into your Discord server and figure out how to sort of merge communities a little bit. I think that'll be a lot of fun. A lot of, as you know, a lot of people in community, a lot of students and early in career folks taking classes around TinyML on different platforms. And then we have a lot of industry partnerships, probably 100 plus companies involved at various levels. So semiconductor, software, device builders, as you mentioned. We're also getting more and more commercial companies involved. So we have Procter and Gamble, we have Schneider, we have Goodyear, and a bunch of other folks coming in. Hopefully we'll get some of those quick serve restaurants in there too. But it's a really interesting community that's kind of building a lot of energy around the space. So when I look at it, I kind of look at this flywheel of uh, constituents. So of course we have this area here. I don't know if you can see my cursor in Zoom, but yes, you can. Perfect. This whole rich community of universities and students I mentioned. I'm a big fan of Boston University, but I'm a big fan of all academia, and so much interesting stuff going on there in terms of figuring out, what's possible, um, and what's next in this space. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here to make better connections between the academic community and the industry or industrial community, in terms of mentorships, in terms of internships, in terms of career paths. Working at Microsoft, I know that we always were looking for folks with a lot of passion and in this space. And I think any of the Fortune 500 companies I'd worked with would say the same thing, as well as AWS and Google and smaller tech companies. I used to tell all my mentees that these days every company is a tech company. Every company needs software people. Every company needs hardware people too. And so, if you want a career in tech, you don't always need to go to, the FANG. You could go to, Nike or McDonald's. Friend of mine runs the Walmart IT group here in Redmond. There's about 300 people in Redmond, Bellevue, Washington, working for Walmart. On the tech side, they actually have like 30,000 people in their tech group at Walmart. So, working at Walmart's not a bad thing. So that's the university and student side. As mentioned before, there's all these folks making tech, making the next chip, making the next software. That's fantastic. Then there's all these solution providers, right? And they're, basically writing apps or, writing applications and solutions using the tech to solve real problems and selling those solutions. So that could be, healthcare solutions, or as I mentioned before, quick serve restaurant solutions. We did a project with Weyerhaeuser where someone built a whole system to analyze the wood and the wood grain that was coming through the mills and doing some, pattern detection on quality of wood grain. So it's interesting. Lots of cool solutions here, super critical. Tech without a solution, it's not really very useful, right? So that's a super important part of the ecosystem here. And then I mentioned the commercial customers and NGOs. So people that, are on the buy side, right? They're looking to buy a solution that uses this tech that is powered by, academia. Um, and then they have government and elected officials. This is an area where TinyML Foundation is leaning in to help educate policymakers around the world and other kind of government leaders as they develop their policies and legislation, whether it's EU or US or other governing bodies, and also, foundations, other foundations, to understand what is TinyML, what's happening in this space. So we'll talk about it, but we have an event we're staging in Washington, D.C. in the fall to do just that. We are also speaking at we have a workshop, I think call it a workshop, at the ITU event, focused on the United Nations SDGs, coming up at the end of May. So this is a whole area here that I think with your help too, we can help get everyone educated, and aware of what's possible, what's next, and therefore, here's the way to use this stuff responsibly, and here's the right legislation and/or guardrails to be put in place as these things get deployed, to help everyone feel that this is accretive to our society. So that's the other part. But all these things, the other thing is like these are all interdependent. So, as I mentioned before, one part of the ecosystem sort of powers the other. And so you end up with this nice flywheel of everyone being motivated and incentivized. So I guess my takeaway message is that the academic community here is super important as part of the TinyML community and Edge AI community. But it's also part of this, it's helping power the rest of the ecosystem as well. And we wouldn't have the rest of the ecosystem unless we had this kind of core community of knowledge and understanding and research that's actually developing this stuff. So appreciate it. I mentioned before we have some events coming up. The one in Italy is coming up at the end of June. We have this symposium on national sustainability in Washington, D.C., which would be really interesting. And then TinyML Asia in Taipei, which would be good as well. Sorry, taking coffee. It's actually 6 in the morning here for me, so 6:26. So it's definitely coffee time. Okay. And I really love these events. I think one of the, as I mentioned before, it's hard sometimes when you have such a geographically diverse community, but we're committed to going places and being there and creating community in person as much as possible. We have the meetups, which are great, but these type of events, I know we're doing a great thing here, which is great online, but being there in person, I'm really working with the team. Like, we're Taipei this year. Next year, maybe we'll be in Japan. Maybe we'll be in Kuala Lumpur. I want to do something in Africa. I want to do something in the Latin American community somewhere. So we want to sort of mix it up and make sure we have events that are geographically diverse as diverse as our community is. It's kind of hard to do because everyone is all over the place, but it's exciting. It's great to kind of go to different parts of the world and figure out what's happening there. And the nice thing too, as you know, about AI and edge AI, especially in TinyML, is that it is so universal. The agricultural communities, industrial communities, healthcare. I mean, these are things that are happening everywhere. And so the TinyML Foundation needs to be everywhere as well, which we are. So partnership opportunities, our pitch to tech companies is pretty straightforward. Understand state of the art, be a part of the community, understand what's happening, contribute to it, develop great partnerships, meet potential customers and solution providers and get some marketing value, especially for the smaller ones. For the commercial companies and NGOs, discover solutions, state of the art solutions, what's happening out there to help your business or your governmental organization grow, and also get talent pipeline. And then for academia, it's really how do we collaborate together? There's a lot of collaboration going on amongst academia, but making the tighter connections with industry and tech companies is one of our goals. So there's collaboration on R&D and AI research in general. And then also the mentorship internship opportunities, which we want to get a little more programatized around. And then kind of career paths.
There was
Ooh, I think someone had a thing. Okay. So that kind of wraps up the general overview of the TinyML Foundation. This picture, by the way, came from Professor Reddy at Harvard. I think one of his students put it together, but I love it because it's really shows like all of the stuff happening with on the Tiny side, relative to what we read about in the paper around GPTs and things like that. So kind of fun. If you scan this, as I said, the YouTube channel, great place to start. If you happen to be on LinkedIn, a lot of stuff going on there too. But the YouTube channel is kind of where we throw a lot of our content as well. So with that, I thought maybe I'd open up to some questions if there was anyone had questions or ideas.
Uh, we have, for example, one question here, Pete. Let me see. For example, from Ashir, he asked, for example, the best way for breaking into the field of a TNML for someone not from the tech background. In his case, for example, is a physics major, so he asked about how he can start in the field.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, as I mentioned before, sometimes like as I told some of my mentees, like every company is a tech company these days. So you don't necessarily need to start at a Microsoft or an AWS if you want to get into the field. A lot of companies, if you happen to have a penchant for agriculture or healthcare or sporting goods or, the food industry, there are places where you can add value in those companies. Companies that are, probably lower in tech capacity would be happy to have some tech capabilities. So that might be an easier entree than going straight through the front door at, Google, for example. So that's kind of one of my tips and tricks I give folks, but you know. Let's
Mm.
see.
Do you know
Any
some portal to find tiny ML internships?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of talking about how we build one of those out. So we want to create a clearinghouse for internships and jobs. Um, so getting the community, getting the industry community to kind of publish that and then having people be able to read and act on that. That is on the list of things to do, on my very, very long list of things to do. But yes, I hope that we can get something up and running pretty soon on that because there's a lot of latent demand to get those things broadcast. I mean, each company has their own thing. So if you go to NVIDIA, they have a program and they have, Microsoft has its own program, but it'd be nice if there was more of a clearinghouse to sort of put all this stuff together and slice and dice it by geography and stuff like that. So that is a goal for us is to create some sort of exchange between the industry and everyone else.
There's a question from Brevi. Says, are there also mentorship for teachers who would want to teach include TinyML in their classes? And that
Hmm.
question for Pete, but if anyone's on this video, you need to follow Marcelo, the other co-host. His write-ups are amazing. Pete, do you have something about the mentorships?
Yeah, that's another thing we'd like to get more programmatic about. So matching mentors with mentees on some sort of exchange platform. So this platform that we're discussing would have, sort of a clearinghouse for internship opportunities, job opportunities, and also mentorship pairing and having some sort of framework for mentorship programs. So that's on our list to sort of get more programmatic about. Right now, it's a little bit of, you know, catch as can. I know the universities all have some pretty good mentorship programs. Like I mentioned, Boston University has a good one, but yeah, it would be nice if we could be a little more programmatic and especially because the geographic diversity out there. I think if you can log into the TinyML Foundation and put in a search for a mentor and pop up a few candidates and get connected, I think that'd be fantastic. So that's on our list of things to do.
Question from Naziru. What are the future challenges of TinyML?
Hmm. Well, it's always tough to predict the future. As I mentioned, I think that we're going to see a lot of multimodal types of AI solutions out there. Um, you know, when we started with IoT, actually, I started with embedded computing way back when I was at Phoenix, we had embedded BIOS business where we did headless, deployments of disconnected things. And then with IoT, sensors collected some data and every so often kind of spit it up to the cloud or something. Um, and then with TinyML, these end sensors, I guess, would also be able to just process that data and make some, maybe send up the metadata to the cloud and take some action. And now what we're seeing is that there's AI at every stage of the cloud to edge, right? And so I think one of the big challenges will be orchestration. So how do you, as a operator of this solution, think about what AI workloads are running where, when, and why, and how do I manage them? Manage them not only from a kind of reinforced learning perspective, how do I keep them fresh and smart, but also do that in a secure way? Encrypting AI models is definitely something that people are figuring out, whether that's in rest or in motion. So this idea of orchestrating a system of AI workloads from tiny to Blackwells is really, I think, the next frontier. Of course, there's always going to be like, how do I squish the model down and how do I do more with less, right? So I want to get lower power. I want to get more capabilities. But I think the orchestration one to me feels like maybe because I came from the deployment side. So I would be sitting there with Chipotle or 7-Eleven trying to figure out how do we actually ship this thing. And sometimes it gets tripped up on the complexity of the deployment and the manageability of this thing and updatability. So to me, that's kind of like really tricky.
Here's a question from Winston. What kind of startups can college students work on using TinyML, something useful to socioeconomic growth? What are the untouched areas you notice?
It's hard to find untouched areas, to be honest with you. There's a bunch of presentations I mentioned happening at this ITU event at the end of May, where we're talking about kind of examples where AI, especially TinyML, is being used for good. And the whole AI for good movement is fascinating if you dig into that. There's a lot of examples. And some of them are, pretty profound. So you talk about sort of water quality, there's one I saw in beekeeping, make that more efficient and effective. Anything that can affect kind of food supply, healthcare, those are pretty foundational. So I think those are probably one of the most impactful things where you can apply AI. It's hard to find an untouched area, but I would encourage people to look at the AI for Good initiative happening, the United Nations SDGs. If you want to look for like big impact, that's cool. So startups, I did a startup in the Bay Area back in the .com era. We did a color correction startup. It's called eColor. If anyone's ever heard of it, probably haven't. But we did color correction. So how do you sort of properly represent real world color on digital screens? Which is kind of has to do with how people see color and all kinds of other things, as you can imagine. And it was a lot of fun. And we raised a bunch of money and hired a bunch of people and eventually sold the whole thing. And startups are a lot of fun because you kind of get this kernel of an idea like we had, and you get a lot of people enthusiastic about it. And, the problem we were solving was not as profound as healthcare or whatever. We were solving the problem for if you bought a red sweater online and you got it home and it was a different shade of red, then you would return it. So we solved that problem by using our technology. But it's all about finding that problem to solve and then just going at it. Yeah, untouched areas, I don't know if there is such a thing.
Pete, I saw in your background that you mentioned something about wearables. My feeling is that's an area has a lot of room for change.
Yeah, for sure. I think I have my Ultra 2 watch here. I'm a pretty well measured person. I consider myself pretty the measured self. But yeah, wearables, like more sophisticated understanding of what's happening out there through wearables. It's definitely an opportunity, especially in for like aging in place and elderly care and things like that. I think we'll see a lot more advancements in that for sure, and being able to sort of process that data, where the data happens on the person will be pretty cool. So, yeah, wearables would be good.
Yeah,
good.
No, one more question is interesting for you from Ahmed Mohammed. He asked, as an expert in many modern amazing fields, do you think that LLMs and like ChatGPTs will be the future science, and the one doesn't learn data science analysis and machine learning? How do you see that?
That's kind of a good question. I mean, I'm a big fan of like the transformer model architecture and like how that's going to change things. The chat bots are one thing, and that's we'll see how that's already affecting things quite profoundly. But the ability to sort of use I'm excited about sort of the applicability of that model architecture on other scenarios. As I mentioned before, like I saw a pretty good demo at the GTC of using like very lightweight image sensors to capture something and then using LLMs or transformer models to describe that scene in more detail and then take action. So that kind of combination of transformer models and kind of TinyML to me is like a really rich area for opportunity. But in terms of like how these chat bots and things like that are going to affect us and how we, it's we'll see what happens. I don't know. Everyone's trying to predict that. I'm not going to try. But the combination is that's the cool part, I think, when you mix it together.
Pete, there is another question here from Nilu Sinha. Sorry about the pronunciation of the names. The question is about cybersecurity implications of TinyML. Any applications related to cybersecurity or something like?
Well, I think that certainly the idea of keeping the model secure and the data secure, especially in the training and updating, is really critical. That's I would say, I don't say table stakes, but that's good hygiene for any system. So using some of like the TPM and hardware capabilities to encrypt models. A lot of the companies in the industry treat their models as very important IP. And so, especially a model, I remember I won't say the company's names, but companies that are using models to detect anomalies in product, especially in agriculture, freshness of food, quality of lumber, things like that. These are really important pieces of IP for these big companies. And so these models need to be protected. That means they're encrypted. That means the data is encrypted. And that means it's decrypted. Now we're talking about using some power. So that's really important, I think. Cybersecurity, there's this whole other area of AI and cybersecurity where you're using anomaly detection to find, anomalous behavior in the network. There's lots of that stuff out there, Microsoft Defender and a bunch of other products that are looking at these kind of complex deployed systems and looking for suspicious behavior. But I think the area of like, how do you create super secure levels of AI workloads from edge to cloud is really important. And that requires the hardware support, in every level. And it gets back to sort of orchestration as well. Like, how do we keep these things encrypted and secure, but also performant and cost effective? I think that's a big area.
For people who want to ask a question verbally, if you can raise your hand, it makes it a little easier. I know Gene had his mic on for a bit, and now Perrin has his mic on. Do you want to ask a question? With the cybersecurity, I think one of our show and tells on Thursday will be talking about TinyML being attacked. So,
cool.
Go ahead, Gene.
Yes, my question is about using TinyML for flood prediction,
right.
to increase accuracy in prediction, because my research now is focusing that way. So I was thinking about like using sensors in my research. What can you advise people?
Yeah. There's a company I've worked with called Caliper in Australia that's really interesting. Kallipr. The gentleman who runs it used to run IoT for Telstra in Australia, but they do a lot of kind of water anomaly detection, I would call it. So they monitor sewers and floods, and they also monitor like train tracks and do things. So they do some really cool, pretty hardened industrial environment sensors. That's one of their kind of secret sauces, is how do you take some of this equipment out into the real world and deploy it so that it works under some extreme conditions. So if you look up Caliper, they have some pretty cool stuff that they're working on. And if you want to get in touch with them, I'm happy to make a connection. But they're doing a lot of cool stuff with, it's like, basically, looking at patterns, water patterns, and with these very hardened sensors, and then going back to the cloud. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Caliper. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, really cool stuff.
Please, if some of the guys are not talking, then please put the microphone in mute. Okay, there's some sound in the back. Thank you. Okay, I think that we have a time for a couple questions before Sean. Let me see. There is some specific questions about some projects. Maybe you can in fact, Peter, there is a lot of questions of a different type of projects, specific projects, like TinyML for Jean-Pierre, that up to do the flows, like he talk, and like from Zacharias, how do you think that TinyML is useful in monitoring chemical reaction and predicting the right product? I mean, no.
Good question.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, what the other cool area that most people are aware of is there's some really amazing sensors out there, chemical sensors and things like you look at Bosch and some of the things like gas sensors and, you know, other things. So like that is really amazing to pair up with TinyML to do sort of anomaly prediction on some of these kind of fluids and gases, which can be really critical indicators of something going wrong or going right. So I think that's a fascinating space. We have a number of sensor companies as part of the TinyML Foundation community, and that always is fascinating to me, how you can take sort of real world atomic stuff, you know, turn atoms into bits basically with these sensors. I think it's just fantastic.
No, fantastic. Well, I think that what we can do, we can have some of the question or specific projects, and in the Discord, maybe you can go there and give some examples for people. Mr. Pete, thanks a lot for your talk. I think that you guys in the TinyML Foundation are doing a great job, and we hope that we can continue to work together, academia and the folks from industry. We just the next guy that we have here is Sean. I think that Sean can jump in and to join us. Sean Himmel from Edimpost is one example of one of the companies that have started to really to help us engineer and practitioners in the world of TinyML. But that's it.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, Pete. And
thank you, everybody.
Great talk.